name is Catherine Matthews, and I'm the director of the Up County Regional Office for County Executive Elrich. It's also known as the Northern County Regional Office. Thank you for joining us tonight for the virtual fiscal year 2022 Citizens Advisory Board's Capital Improvements Program Forum, also known as the CIP Forum. Let me remind everyone to please remember to turn off your microphones and your cameras. We're using this virtual format tonight for the first time to discuss the county's budget priorities, and we just want to make sure everyone can hear. I first want to acknowledge any elected officials we have from the state or the county level that might be participating in the discussion tonight, either from our state delegation or from our county council, for instance. And I do see that we have our county council president, Sydney Katz, with us. Thank you for coming and welcome. If you are one of our officials and I miss your name, or if you're representing someone, please add your name. Just acknowledge that in the chat. That would be helpful for us. Appreciate it. If you're wondering which communities are actually found in the Up County region, let me just clarify our boundaries for you. We start at the south with the Shady Grove Metro. We go west to the Potomac River. We go north to the Frederick County line and east to include the town of Laytonsville. Our region consists of more than 340,000 residents, and we also have 5 municipalities: the city of Gaithersburg, the towns of Poolesville, Barnesville, Laytonsville, and Washington Grove. Next on the agenda will be a brief presentation from our Up County Citizens Advisory Board Chair, Will Roberts. But first, let me just mention that the county's Office of Management and Budget will provide a presentation on the fiscal climate of the county. And then you'll hear some remarks from our county executive, Marc Elrich. The forum will conclude with your ability to express your views on the county's capital budget and capital improvements program priorities. With that, we'll have 5 breakout groups for smaller discussions on some of the topics that most people are really talking about. We'll have breakout rooms, one for transportation, one on education, one that will cover recreation, parks, and libraries, another on the environment, and the 5th one on health and human services and other capital topics. These smaller discussions will help us get a regional snapshot of important issues, the ones that you're interested in. We encourage you to visit and participate in as many of the breakout groups as possible. You can visit each one by by checking the chat, where we'll have the links noted for you, or you can return to the Office of Management and Budget's website, which is www.montgomerycountymd.gov/OMB. It might be easier to use the links in the chat. If there's time before we move to the breakout rooms, we'll take some general questions. Otherwise, questions on more detailed topics can be covered in the breakout rooms, and we'll have county department and agency representatives there, our subject matter experts, available to answer those questions. You'll be able to ask questions by raising your hand in this application, Teams application. If you're not successful in doing that, or you'd rather just write your comment or question, you can send an email to me, Catherine.Matthews, 2 T's, at montgomerycountymd.gov, or you can note your comment or question in the chat, and we'll make sure it gets answered and you'll be acknowledged. Members of your Up County Citizen Advisory Board, the Montgomery County Department representatives, and the Montgomery County agency representatives will be available to participate in each of the breakout room discussions with you. And as I said, that's where they'll be able to respond to your questions. Again, please remember to turn off your microphones and your cameras until it's your opportunity to ask a question. If you have a question, our recommendation is that you use the raise your hand feature on the floating taskbar, or it may be found at the top of your screen. and then turn on your microphone so we can hear you. We may not be able to answer every question during tonight's session, so please, as I said before, send me an email. I'll have my email address in the chat so we can respond directly to you. At a later date, each Citizens Advisory Board will provide the county executive with a comprehensive summary of your concerns for consideration as he develops the fiscal year 2023 capital budget and the fiscal year 2023 to 28 capital improvements program. Since this is a new approach to gathering public input, we would like your thoughts on how the Citizens Advisory Board's meeting, this meeting tonight, went from your perspective. What did you like? What did you wish we had done? What could be done differently? Again, you can send that email to me. I think at this point, now we'll hear from our regional citizens, our Up-County Citizens Advisory Board Chair, Will Roberts.
Well, good evening. Thanks, Kathy. Good evening, Kathy and County Executive Elrich, and good evening to all of our Up-County neighbors. And thank you for joining us. I will be incredibly brief because we definitely want to hear from our county executive and from the experts that he's brought with them to talk about the capital improvements budget. I just want to bring you greetings on behalf of the Up-County Citizens Advisory Board. You heard Kathy Matthews, our fantastic, incomparable Up-County Regional Director, giving you some of the broad outlines of sort of what the Up-County area covers and where a lot of our members come from. Our board consists of 20 residents and other representatives of the business community, folks who are in the nonprofit communities, folks who are in all sort of walks of life and backgrounds, and come together to discuss some of the topics you're going to hear discussed tonight. We spent a lot of time talking about issues and projects that are tied to the CIP, from a lot of transportation and infrastructure concerns and discussions on our board. But we meet every month, 3 times a month, in a format of our full board, as well as our land use committee and our quality of life committee. And so we sort of filter down and filter up various issues that are of community concern, things that are before the council, budgetary items, and sort of big policy items. And we spend a lot of time just talking about what's going on in our communities. And our goal is to generate ideas and also to provide feedback about what's going on in our county up to the county executive. And so you all, our community, are an important part of that. You are always welcome out to any of our meetings, be they a committee meeting or our full board meeting. You can find out more about what the Up-County Citizens Advisory Board is doing and what's on our agenda, and also when our meetings are, by going to Montgomery County MD/Up-County. Is that right, Kathy? Did I get that right? She's nodding yes. So Montgomery County MD/Up-County to see our full board meeting schedule, and you can see some of the past agendas to see what issues that we've talked about. So my goal here is just to thank you all for participating after, I'm sure, was a long day of Zoom and Teams and other meetings for all of us. But we're here because we care about the future of the county and want to hear about what that future looks like, particularly on projects impacting the Up-County. And so with that, hope to see you all in screen soon and prayerfully in person at some point. And I will kick it over to, I believe, to our folks from the Office of Management and Budget for their presentation.
Okay, thank you, Will. And thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. My name is Gary Nalvin. I'm an analyst with the Montgomery County Office of Management and Budget. This evening, we'll be discussing the purpose of these Citizen Advisory Board meetings, the Capital Improvements Program, or CIP, the fiscal outlook for fiscal years 2022 through 27, the CIP process timeframe, the county's open budget website. We'll have a presentation by the county executive on capital budget priorities. And at the end, if we have time, there will be some questions. Next slide. The purpose of these meetings is first, to provide county residents with information about the capital budget and capital improvements program, to provide residents with an opportunity to express their views and priorities for future capital improvement projects, particularly for the next full CIP, which is in fiscal years 2023 to 28, and to provide information to the county executive and county departments concerning the capital improvement projects that are funded in the current budget. Next slide. The county has two budgets. There's the operating budget, which provides for public services such as education, teachers, first responders, and public safety, and social and health services. And the capital budget, which funds facilities and infrastructure such as schools and colleges, roads and bridges, libraries, police and fire stations. Next slide. Some information about the Capital Improvements Program, or CIP. Capital improvements are projects that have long-term usefulness and require large expenditures of capital funds, which are usually programmed over more than 1 year, and the result is a durable asset, such as a bridge or a fire station. The capital budget uses a 6-year plan. New projects are usually added in the later years of the CIP, since prior approved projects have used up funds in the earlier years. The CIP includes capital expenditure estimates, funding requirements, capital budget requests, and program data. The capital budget process is a biennial process, with expenditures being planned over the next 2 years. And annual capital budget resolution provides the appropriation authority for spending, with unused appropriation carried over to later years. Each project in the Capital Improvements Program is described in a project description form, or PDF. Next slide. This pie chart summarizes capital improvement funding in the fiscal year 21 through 26 budget by category. By far the largest category is Montgomery County Public Schools, with nearly 40% of funding. Transportation, road and bridge projects make up about 23% of funding, with the remainder funding projects such as libraries, recreation centers, public safety, and other government buildings. Next slide. I'll now present a fiscal outlook for fiscal years 2022 through 27. Next slide. Montgomery County is focused on financial sustainability. Some key concepts of financial sustainability include the requirement for a balanced budget, where revenues cover operating costs in spite of revenue volatility, a slowdown on new debt to reduce the rate of growth in expenditures. The adopted fiscal year 20 and 21 budgets met the reserve contribution target goal of 10% of revenues. This 10% reserve provides a buffer against unexpected costs and response to emergencies such as the current COVID-19 crisis. Another concept includes pre-funding of pensions and retirement insurance, or OPEB. Next slide. The impact of the COVID-19 virus only began to be known very late in the county's fiscal year 21 budget process. There are still many unknown factors, particularly the duration and severity of shutdown orders, changes in behavior impacting the economy and residential needs, as well as the complete extent of federal aid to assist residents, businesses, and the county government. Next slide. The county successfully renegotiated existing labor agreements to minimize the financial impact of COVID-19 related differential pay. As a result of this and other savings measures, the fiscal year 21 total tax-supported budget for all agencies grew only 0.8% versus the fiscal year 20 approved budget. And in late July, the county executive and county council agreed to a fiscal year 21 tax-supported operating budget savings plan of $43.7 million. The approved CIP savings plan included $23.4 million in PAYGO savings and $4.9 million in CIP cash savings. Next slide. Revenues and expenditures in fiscal year 20 were trending close to the budget through the end of the third quarter, but the COVID-19 crisis led to increased expenditures and revenue reductions in the fourth quarter. Year-end fiscal year 20 results are pending, but preliminary information seems to indicate that federal support for individuals and businesses has cushioned some of the COVID revenue impacts. The county has received $222.6 million in federal aid that can be used for COVID-19 related expenses, and the federal money will likely be spread across fiscal years 20 and 21. Even with significant federal aid, a continuity of services budget, and an approved FY21 savings plan, it's possible that the fund balance and reserves may need to be drawn down in subsequent years. Next slide. Some other issues related to COVID-19. In response, the county is pursuing federal assistance, which includes maximizing our reimbursement from FEMA. And the county has also received that $222.6 million from the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or CARES Act, and other federal funding. With federal funds from FEMA and CARES, the county is providing grants and assistance programs to the local community. Examples of these programs include COVID-19 testing, direct federal assistance, financial assistance, rental assistance, food assistance, public health emergency grants for small businesses, personal protective equipment, unemployment eligibility outreach campaign, and telework assistance for businesses. Next slide. The county is paying differential pay to employees for work in direct response to the COVID-19 emergency. There is significant pressure on the commercial real estate market sector, and above all, uncertainty as to when the crisis will end. Next slide. This pie chart shows the approved operating budget revenues in the general fund, or where the money comes from. The majority of general fund revenues come from income taxes and property taxes, making up about 60% of revenues, with the remainder coming from state and federal aid, transfer recordation taxes, and other revenue sources. Next slide. We received some mixed signals as a result of a variety of different factors affecting the fiscal outlook for fiscal years 22 through 27. There's the implementation of master sector plans, including White Flint, Shady Grove, Great Seneca, Wheaton, East Community Science Center, will ultimately increase revenues, and county revenues will be significantly impacted by the Maryland State Comptroller versus Wing income tax case. There will be quarterly payments to the state for refunds associated with WIN of $3.7 million in fiscal year 21 and $7.3 million annually beginning in fiscal year 22 and continuing through the first half of fiscal year 2041. The total impact is calculated to be $145.6 million. Next slide. Property tax assessments increased 2.3% in fiscal year 2020, and energy tax, the increase in energy tax has reduced by 27% since fiscal year 2012. Due to COVID-19, home sales have decreased 2.2% through July 2020 compared with January through July 2019. And because of the COVID-19 crisis, the county's unemployment rate was 7.4% in July 2020, compared with 3.2% in July of the previous year. Next slide. Some other factors contributing to continued risk and uncertainty in revenues. July revenue updates projected a $190 million reduction in revenues for fiscal year 21 and over $1 billion reduction during the next 6 years. This will have long-term financial consequences due to the county's charter limit on tax revenues. In July, revenues for fiscal year 21 and 22 were estimated to be less than fiscal year 20, not recovering until fiscal year 23. On the plus side, the state of Maryland recently reported ending fiscal year 20 with a surplus. Next slide. The county's August income tax distribution was above revised estimates. Additional federal COVID support for individuals, businesses, and local governments is uncertain at this time. Federal COVID unemployment and business assistance programs were critical in mitigating county and state revenues, and critical information will be needed to refine revenue estimates. That information will not be known until late September for property taxes and in November for income taxes. Next slide. For a picture of the approved fiscal year 21 operating budget, a large portion of general fund expenditures are mandatory payments. Montgomery County Public Schools and college budgets are subject to future maintenance of effort, or MOE requirements, revenue stabilization fund, and debt service payments. All of those together constituted 64.2% of the fiscal year 21 approved general fund revenues. The approved fiscal year 21 operating budget was a continuity of services budget and assumed revenues as of March 2020. Next slide. Fiscal year 21 fees, bus fares, licenses, permits, fines, and other revenue were likely to be significantly impacted in the general mass transit and recreation funds by COVID. A 25% decline in these revenue sources would equal approximately $35.9 million in reduced revenues compared to the FY21 approved budget. Next slide. The county's fiscal year 21 fixed and other commitments are shown in this pie chart. The largest commitment is maintenance of effort funding for Montgomery County Public Schools and Montgomery College, with other required spending, including debt service payments, PAYGO, and contributions to OPEB, pensions, and reserve, with the rest of the budget making up about 27% of revenues. Next slide. Some of the growing needs and challenges associated with operating expenditures include the continuing COVID-19 crisis, increase in student enrollment, the operating impact of new facilities that have been constructed, spikes in costs and prices for weather or snow removal, fuel and energy prices and food prices, and debt service payments. Next slide. Some of the CIP-related fiscal challenges coming up include Montgomery County Public Schools enrollment growth, which is expected to require significant funding for new schools and additions to avoid significant increases in the use of relocatable classrooms and putting areas of the county into moratorium. Construction costs have been increasing. More funding is needed for HVAC, roof replacement, road resurfacing, and other projects to protect the county's infrastructure, particularly as renovations and modernizations have been delayed. The county needs to respond to community expectations, such as master plans, and the capital budget demands on the operating budget may be unaffordable. Next slide. Direct cash contributions in the fiscal year 21 approved budget include PAYGO spending to supplement bond funding of $8.6 million after a $23.4 million savings plan reduction, and other cash funding of $61 million after a $4.9 million savings plan reduction. There's the cost to operate new or expanded facilities, and there's debt service costs, every $10 million in debt increases annual debt service by about $1 million. Debt service payments continue for 20 years after the issuance of debt. Next slide. Tax-supported debt service payments are increasing. The county has taken measures to reduce future use of debt service in order to reduce the operating budget impact. Next slide. Debt service comes with opportunity costs. For every $1 million used for debt service, that funding could be used to fund, for example, 14 public school teachers, 9 firefighters, operating costs for a library for a year, operating 8 senior centers, 5 recreation community centers, and other types of expenses. Next slide. As I mentioned, the county is seeking to reduce general obligation bond borrowing. The current plan for fiscal year 21 through 26 projects that GO bond funding will reduce from $320 million in fiscal year 21 to $270 million in fiscal year 26. Next slide. To give you some idea of the CIP budget process timeframe, in September through early January, county departments submit capital budget spending county departments submit capital budgets, spending affordability guidelines are developed. O&B and departments review capital budget spending with the county executive. On January 15th, the county executive transmits the CIP budget to the county council. In March and April, CIP amendments are submitted. And during January through May, there are public hearings and council committee reviews, with the full council review and CIP approval coming at the end of May. Next slide. I encourage everyone to visit the county's open budget website at montgomerycountymd.gov/open budget, where you can explore the county's operating and capital budgets and answer some of your questions you may have. Next slide. And now for a presentation on capital budget priorities by County Executive Marc Elrich.
Mr. Elrich, I think you're muted.
Okay, I'll try this again.
Thank you.
Okay. So first of all, thank everybody for being here tonight. And I wanted to let you know that one of the big changes we've made in doing budget forms is that when I came in, the budget forms used to be done in the late winter after the budget was already created. So asking for input after you've created the budget, it's a little bit late in the process. So we changed this process, and we are doing the forums now. We've completed 5 operating budget I think it was 5 operating budget forums, and we have 1 more capital budget forum to go. And then we'll go about making our budget. As was said previously, we are waiting on 2 rather large events that'll affect our budgeting decisions. One is we'll get a good look at income taxes in November, and we'll get a good look at property taxes in December. And we all know that we've been severely affected by COVID. There's lots of unemployment and underemployment, and we would be surprised not to see a reduction in income taxes. And it's also likely that because of high vacancy rates and the ability of commercial property to go in for reassessments, that we could easily see a reduction in property taxes as well. That makes, on a side note, as you guys are going out to vote, that makes voting against question B just vitally important, because question B would limit the county's tax revenues to this year's revenues, for example, times the rate of inflation. Well, there's not going to be any inflation this year. And if we have declining revenues and a low rate of inflation, it'll be absolutely impossible to grow the budget at all at a time when we're likely to have greater needs than ever. And we would be in a position of ratcheting down the county budget and leaving a lot of needs unmet. And I know that one of the previous slides talked a little bit about the schools, just to give you a magnitude of the problem that the schools have, because we have not gotten enough money from we have not gotten enough money from impact taxes and development fees. The county has about a $750 million backlog on school construction and about a $750 million backlog on school renovations and repairs. 2 different things, but a big issue in the county. And we've been paralyzed by a mistake that was made 30 years ago, and we continue to pay for it now. In the capital budget, you'll see reflected some of the initiatives that we've made a priority. The first is expanding early child care and education. The second initiative is doing what we can to preserve affordable housing and increase the supply of affordable housing. Our MPDU program targets only the top of the affordable housing range, and we literally have tens of thousands of people who are ineligible to participate in any of the housing programs because their incomes are too low. We continue to be committed to fighting climate change. One thing that's true for this, and it's true for everything else up here, when COVID hit, I talked with our managers, and the message I tried to send them is that every problem that we're facing before COVID, we are going to be facing when COVID is over. This is going to end, but our other problems in the county that we're dealing with are not going to end. And so people need to be working both on the present and what do we do to change, our situation under COVID. How do we minimize the damage? But also, how do we go forward when COVID ends? Because we need to be able to do both. So one important project that is both an economic development driver, but also a climate change tool is building the bus rapid transit network. The county put it in its master plan probably 6 years ago. We are still just now opening our first line, and it's a line that isn't fully a bus rapid transit line. We need to prioritize building this if we're going to be successful economically. That leads to the third thing, which is improving economic and community development in Montgomery County. And we can talk more about that, but it's you'll be seeing a briefing that's coming to us. Was a study that was done by a group for the Economic Development Corporation, and it kind of lays out basically a 10-year problem in which the county has basically stagnated, and we've got to figure a way out of that stagnation. We are reimagining public safety. The good news is Our police department is one of the better police departments. And the not surprising news is we have many of the same problems that other police departments have, particularly in community relations, and particularly when it comes to incidents that really affect the trust of the community and the police. So we are working on this. This is a major project for us. And finally, we are committed to advancing racial equity and social justice. And if anything ever made clear the disparities that exist in this community, COVID's pretty much done it. You see it in the digital divide, who has access to computers, who could contemplate having multiple children at home on multiple computers taking lessons, and who can't. And also on the health impacts, where the African American community and the Hispanic community have just been disproportionately hammered by COVID in death rates and in the number of cases. They are far more likely to get COVID. The health impacts tend to be more severe. A lot of that has to do with many people having lifetimes of inadequate health care and coming into this with pre-existing conditions. So we are as committed as we ever were, and more so, to dealing with these issues if we're going to move forward in the county. So next slide. So these are some of the projects that we're doing. We've been engaged in childcare renovations. We're provided money to the childcare sector in order to help ready facilities for the expansion of childcare, to make sure that we have the facilities to put childcare in, to help people make renovations and improvements that are necessary to make childcare safe in the era of COVID. And so that has been one of the things that we are supporting in the capital budget effort. On affordable housing, we are pushing to leverage on private sector funding with our own money to preserve and increase the county's affordable housing stock. We have done a couple of projects where we have been able to insist on higher levels of affordability, being able to provide housing for people at 30 and 40 and 50% of area median income, roughly translating to $30,000, $40,000, and $50,000 annual incomes, as opposed to only doing MPDUs, which serve people between 60 and 80% of median income. We are looking at electrifying and increasing the efficiency of our new and existing buildings. So in Holiday Park on Veers Mill Road, we are renovating one of our senior centers, and we are putting in solar windows. And this is going to be a proof of concept to see if using solar windows, which are basically windows that use electrical generating solar glass, if it's cost effective and if it's energy efficient. And if that works out, then we are looking forward to doing this on other of our own properties, but also building this into the building code. We're also looking at wrapping a building in solar glass, which creates both an external wall, which provides extra insulation, a wall of glass that separates the building with an area of called dead air between the building wall and the glass wall that adds to insulation, but also allows us to generate electricity from the sides of buildings. If I wanted to electrify this county, doing rooftops would be a relatively easy thing in residential neighborhoods. But as soon as you get into high rises, there's not nearly enough rooftop to provide electricity to the entire building. And that's where having the ability to generate electricity from the sides of the building could be a really significant tool that would both lower electrical costs for owners, improve the efficiencies of their buildings, and reduce our carbon emissions. We are looking at increasing the use of electric buses. We're going to be changing our bus fleet over to electric. The BRT will be electric buses, and we're looking at changing our ride-on fleet over to electric. And we're looking at some creative ways of financing that. We have to invest in our resource recovery and recycling facilities. The station in Shady Grove is some of the facilities are reaching the end of their life. They're not functioning properly, and they're not able to handle the capacity that we have, or the amount of waste we have, particularly plastic, glass, and bottles. And so we're going to be investing there and making it more efficient. And we're looking innovatively if we can find products that we can produce off of the waste in order to actually generate revenue rather than just bundling up plastic bottles and shipping them out someplace. Next slide. We started the bus rapid transit on Route 29. We opened flash service. It runs from, I think it's 6:30 in the morning to about midnight. On 29, it goes from Burtonsville. Eventually, it'll go up to Columbia and runs to Silver Spring. It is as frequent as, I think, every 7.5 minutes at rush hour, but at no worse than 15-minute intervals the rest of the day. So it's regular service that provides this connection. In the northern part of it, above New Hampshire Avenue, it functions more like bus rapid transit. And we are working on a solution to depart from New Hampshire Avenue down to Sligo Creek Parkway, where we can put a reversible lane in the middle of the road so that we can provide peak direction, non-congested service for the bus riders. We're working on design work on Veers Mill Road and on 355. And this is a big deal because Veers Mill Road connects Wheaton to Rockville, so it's a connection at the upper end of the red line, the two pieces of the red line, and lets people go from one side of the county to the other. And the 355 line is absolutely critical to the economic development in White Flint and in Rockville and Twin Brook and points north, and it runs all the way up to Clarksburg. We're also looking at revising the Quarter Cities Transitway. The state pulled the plug on that project and basically won't fund it because they said in its current configuration, it's not really bus rapid transit, and I would agree with them. So we're working on a realignment that both makes it rapid and efficient, but also addresses the state's concerns, and we'll be rolling that out pretty shortly. And we've begun planning for a route along New Hampshire Avenue that would go into the district and go to the metro station on the red line at Fort Totten. And we're also looking at the North Bethesda Transitway, which would connect the Grosvenor Station, most likely the Grosvenor Station, into Westfield. And Westfield, where there's actually, where Montgomery Mall actually has a transit center. It's hoped that that transit center becomes a connection when they put limited access lanes onto the Beltway in 270, that people will be able to take those to go to Tyson's Corner. And we think of that as a big advantage for getting people out of their cars into Northern Virginia, Tyson's Corner, as well as to connect to the Silver Line. That should be a major improvement. Next slide. We're maintaining support for Wheaton and White Flint and the White Oak economic development efforts. And we have exciting news about White Flint. The county has actually signed an agreement that I started negotiating a year ago with Metro for the joint development of the White Flint metro area, 15 acres. And the goal there is to focus it on a combination of life sciences and artificial intelligence and computing. We believe that we have one of the premier life science centers in the country, ranking either 3 or 4, depending how people look at it. And #1 in vaccine development. We have 2 companies that got 5 of the $8 billion that the federal government put into vaccine development. These are really important companies. There is an interest in development along the metro, and then there is a lot of corporate interest in wanting to be on a metro stop, not in office parks. We think we can marry the life sciences with artificial intelligence. This is happening right now in real time in the laboratories, where more and more work is being done by computers in conjunction with wet labs. And it is advancing science at a pace that is that you and I have never seen. And I think the work on COVID is kind of testimony to that. When I talked to the folks at Novavax, when they talked about what their work on a vaccine, they sequenced that virus in about a week. And that's pretty amazing work. So we're working to make sure that we can not only support economic development, but bring, for the first time since the county created life sciences, a purpose-driven development to Montgomery County. The play for Amazon was didn't work, but it kind of set the seed for that. And I spent a lot of time looking at what was in that and what were the advantages of White Flint and why this was being planned. And we decided we can do this with life sciences and make a go of it there. We've replaced a leased fire station and police station to better meet public safety needs and reduce long-term costs. We are building them rather than leasing them. We continue to explore collaborations for facilities that provide mental health and substance abuse and treatment services. We'll be cutting the ribbon on Avery Road very shortly, and that'll be another vast improvement in our substance abuse treatment services. And the county continues to look at co-locating facilities. Next. So I'll just talk a little bit more about racial equity. We believe, and it's painfully obvious, that we have these gaps, and the gaps break along racial lines. It's socioeconomic, and we live in a world, to be blunt, where a person's future success can be predicted by the zip code they live in. And that is not, it's not right, it's not fair, it's not just, and it's not acceptable. And so we're looking at what we can do to provide programming and support to help lift up communities, to make sure that so many kids from these communities do not get left behind, that they have the same opportunities and ability to succeed in school, because we know if we can get them ready and out of school successfully, that their job prospects increase dramatically. Most of the disengaged youth in the county are kids of color. And we need a different approach than we've had. We've talked about this for a long time. Our practice doesn't even come close to meeting the rhetoric, and our progress is even further from our rhetoric. So we are doubling down on efforts to make sure we can bring about transformative policies. We're looking at things like creating jobs through incubators, and not just focusing on high-tech incubators, which I love and will continue to support, but also focusing on incubators that provide skilled jobs, trades jobs, other things that help people develop the skills they need in order to find jobs in the modern economy. And we're going to be working with that majorly. We are reforming the WorkSource Montgomery system to make sure we're actually able to take people where they are and add to their skill set so they can get better jobs. We have to do something more than take somebody who doesn't have a high school education and find the job that doesn't require a high school education. We need to develop a system where we take those people who don't have that education and get them the education, the skills they need so they can get the jobs that pay decent money and would offer them really opportunities to be independent. Next slide. And that leads us to this kind of moment that Montgomery County's at, this very pivotal moment, which is how you guys vote on question A and question B. And so I'll tell you a little about where we are right now. The county changed the charter 30 years ago. And back then they changed the charter and they limited the revenue to the revenue collected the previous year plus inflation. And that seemed reasonable because back then inflation was running 4 or 5% a year. You'd have a regular growth in your revenues. It more or less worked. There were two other things after the sentence that talked about using last year's revenues as the base multiplied by inflation. It said an exempt from that limit were taxes that the county collected on new construction and on rezonings of property. So amazingly, for 30 years, the county has never captured a dime from rezoning of the property. So when we massively upzone places like White Flint 2, like White Flint or Bethesda, and the property values increased, instead of the delta in those commercial property values being added to the tax base, it was never added to the tax base. Instead, the revenue that came in from the increased assessments just went to the amount of money to the limit that was created by limiting the revenues to last year's number times inflation. So our base didn't grow. It just shifted the tax burden. So new construction came in, and the total amount of tax we could raise didn't really increase. And on new construction, we captured 1 out of 3 years of new construction. On the property values, we didn't increase. We didn't catch any years. So basically, while the assessments went up, the money only served to contribute to the limit rather than building the limit. And that meant that we did not raise the money we needed for schools and transportation, for services, for libraries, for all the things that contribute to the quality of life in the county. So, Rich and I, Rich Madaleno, we were puzzling last winter about why it was that people were complaining about higher tax rates and 10% increases in their taxes when we all knew that our revenues were limited by inflation, which was next to nothing. And it turned out that it was exactly the problem. We went back and looked at the charter, and the charter laid out that you could only raise it the way I described, last year's revenues times inflation, and it didn't limit anybody's property taxes. So if you got reassessed and you got a 30% reassessment, you would actually pay the higher tax. You would be assessed that there's the 10% limit every year. So you would get 3 years of assessments that went up 10% each year. You would pay 10% each year as they went up. But the money you were paying just counted against the cap, and that meant somebody else's taxes went down. So we pulled some random addresses out of the county property tax database, and we found, like in Silver Spring, a neighborhood where houses had gotten reassessed and the values went, for example, from about $500,000 to $550,000. And that person got a 10% tax increase. We looked at homes in Potomac that were worth $2 million, and the assessor had assessed them at the same amount over 3 years. So from 1 year to the other, there was no increase in their assessment. Their taxes went down every year because the people who had gotten the 10% increases were paying more money. And since I had a limit on how much I could collect, I had to lower the tax rate. So people whose assessment didn't go up paid a lower tax rate and actually paid less money. And one of the largest commercial projects in Montgomery County in Twin Brook, and I'm talking about something that assesses for more than $200 million, that property had a cut in its property taxes too, because it had a level assessment. And so it didn't grow in assessed value every year. And the only thing that happened was, since more people or some people were paying more in taxes, they got to pay less in taxes. That's not the way the tax system's supposed to work, not the way it was meant to work. The staff in the county misinterpreted the charter for 30 years, completely misinterpreted a simple English sentence that said these things were exempt from the limit. There were no adjectives, no adverbs, no modifiers, no subjunctive clauses. It was just these things are exempt. The county never added them to the base. We lost over $200 million in this time period. So this amendment, voting for question A, which is supported by myself and the council, would deal with that. It would shift the limit to a limit on the tax rate rather than a limit on the amount of money the county could raise. So that it would mean that in order to change the rate upwards, the council would have to vote as a 9-member majority. You couldn't do it with 8 votes. It would require a 9-member majority to do it. This would be an enormous help, and it would let us grow the tax base and realize the value of new construction as it comes on and as values increase, because we make areas more desirable. As they become more desirable, a lot of commercial property begins to appreciate. This is good for the county. Every other county in the region has this, except Montgomery County. Question B is a disaster, because question B leaves everything that's bad about the current system in place. And then Robin found the way to make it worse. The current system says you could increase taxes beyond, or you could increase revenues beyond last year's revenues by more than the inflation rate if you have 9 votes on the council. In other words, you'd have to have unanimous council to be willing to do that. This amendment sets the rate permanently with no ability for unanimous council to raise the rate or to raise the amount of revenue it brings in. So here's our disaster scenario for this year. Our assessable base comes in under what we projected because of reassessments. The amount of revenue comes in under what we projected. This lower number becomes the base, and it can only be increased by the inflation rate, and there may not be any inflation. So our ability to grow any revenues, even though buildings are coming online and everything else is really, really limited. And we're not going to be able to meet the needs in this county. And I look at question B as a death sentence for the county. Now, this last part's important, then I'll move on. You have to vote for A, but you also have to vote against B. Because if you vote for A, it's just a vote for A, and it is possible under this system for A to pass and for B to pass. If both of these things pass, then nothing passes. And then we're stuck with the system now with all of the limitations, and the only escape valve being you need a 9-member vote to change things. But it's too limiting, and it creates too much of a problem, and it doesn't let us capture the assessments properly. So I'm begging people, and this is one of these things where, you know, the leadership on the council and on my side of the street are in absolute harmony. We need to vote for A, and we need to kill B. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Is there another slide there, or is that the end of it? So this kind of explains what I said about the new construction, the inflationary limit. Is there another slide? Questions? Okay.
So we're at that point, Mr. Elrich. Thank you. If anyone has a general question about something the executive just said, or something about the process, now would be a good time to do that, to ask that. Otherwise, if not, we'll move to our breakout rooms. And in the chat, you'll find the links. Pick one. You can visit several if you'd like. And there you'll find one of our board members who will moderate the discussion, and you'll find departmental staff who can answer your questions. Don't forget, you can always put questions back in the chat or send an email, excuse me, send an email to me, Catherine Matthews. So, Mr. Elrich, did you have anything else, or shall we move?
No, I think you can move on.
Okay.
We'll be bringing more information to people, particularly about comparative tax rates of Montgomery County and everybody else. That would be, we think we want to make sure people understand the full picture here.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
So we'll allow about 30 minutes in the chats, and then we'll come back to the main room. Thank you.